We just mounted our sink. I like to mount the sink first if I have a sink to do and edge, because I don't want to mount my edge and then be working over my edge with adhesive out as I'm trying to mount my sink. So I try to work from the inside to the outside of the counter. Now, similar to our sink, when you're putting an edge on, we'll put blocks on the back side to be able to keep that edge from glaciering. So right now this edge is not glued down. This is just dry fitted so that we know where everything's going to go and we know that we have enough overhang. Now, when you put an edge on, you always set it in about 1/16 of an inch from the face of your counter. That 1/16 of an inch gives us a small ridge that our adhesive is able to hang on as it's drying, so it doesn't just fall out of the seam. We always lay the front piece first, and then any side pieces of the counter we butt behind the front piece. That way we don't see a seam out on the front edge of the countertop if the adhesive doesn't cover it. We just have a couple of spring clamps in place going down to lightly hold this in so that we can hot melt all our blocks in, and we're at the point where we're ready to glue. I do not take all of the clamps off at the same time for all of the edges. So I always glue the front first, so I'll leave this side on. And as I take this off, I'm going down and lightly holding it just to make sure. Now, what I do is I take the piece and I pull it away, and sometimes it will stick a little because of the glue blocks that you have. So you may have to bump it slightly just to get it out. But as you do that, you want to take it and put it down the exact way that it was planned. So you make sure that you just step the piece back. So I know that when I take this, I'm going to be going just like this. Now, this is also an opportunity to look down one last time and make sure that there's no ink or anything that can interfere with your seam. I always try to maximize the use of tips on adhesive. So I'm using the adhesive with the same tip that we did for the sink because I like to glue everything up at once. So I come over, I use my finger as a guide, and I will begin pushing out the adhesive. As I'm doing that, we just guide it going down, and we got to get a little bit holding us back as that glue was starting to dry. So I'll use my finger as a guide going all the way down to lay a nice bead of adhesive in. Okay, I'll come back to the section that I had over here just to make sure, because that was my first push out on it, to make sure I have a good mix. I take this, set this aside. Now, typically you can have it where two people can set an edge this long. I'm going to show you, how I do it if you're by yourself. You take the edge, you fit it down there, you have it come down this way. You try to have the edge come down on the adhesive, okay? So I do a quick take to make sure I've got overhang on both ends, and then what I do is I take a couple of clamps real quick and shoot down the edge to make sure that I'm getting it where I've got some adhesive pushing out. Everything is going to be good in that way. Now, as you take that edge in, you take it and you drop it down into the adhesive. You don't slide it into the adhesive. If you do that, you're going to take all that adhesive you had and just push it back, and you're going to get gaps in your seam up front. Then I come with my clamps, and my rule of thumb is I put a clamp every hand. So as I put a clamp in here and I'm clamping it, I figure the next one is going to be where my hand ends. so it's going to be about that far over. If you want to judge it by an actual measurement, you can say every 4 to 6 inches is good. I do not recommend leaving a gap that's this big in between, as you could not have good pressure down here, and you could end up having an issue where your seam gets air in it, and when it gets an air pocket in it, because you can have air in the adhesive, when you go to router this off like we will later, you'll see this white line because it's dust now filling in there, and you either have to go and try to backfill it with adhesive, which it never marries up the right way color wise, or worst case scenario, if you have a huge gap and you're going to have a potential failure in the counter, you have to pull the edge off and redo the whole thing. And that's not very easy to do when you have a chemical bond in some of it. So now I've got clamps all the way down. So now I'll go and I'll do my side. Now, when I do a side, same thing. I pull it back, I inspect it. I make sure, and this is a typical problem that can occur, is the face of the Corian will usually have like a satin type finish. Then you have the backside that's usually rougher, and you can tell the difference. The face will have the pattern more. Some solid surface material, the pattern's pretty distinct on the back as well, and it's very easy to flip-flop it when you're putting the edge on, and that makes it stand out much different when you're trying to do a finished product. So you always want to make sure that you have your face, you have a clean cut here for where it butts in. So we take that piece, set it back. Now I will do the same thing where I run out the adhesive. So I'm doing my horizontal going this way. But when I come to the end, now I have a vertical. I always do the vertical last because gravity's taking over, and I don't want to do that and then go do my horizontal and all the adhesive has run down. So I simply start at the top, fill it heavy, let it bleed down, and that's going to give me my bond. So again, I set it down in and then push that lightly in over there so that I get a bond, and I set a couple of clamps. Now, when you're putting a piece in like this, I always take the top, and that's why I wear gloves, and I wipe the excess adhesive to make sure that these two pieces are connecting. If you take your clamps and you put them at different angles, you can manipulate how this piece drives in. So if a piece is not holding, play with it a little and see if you turn your clamp this way, it will push it, or that way. This piece seems to be holding. I don't see any major movement. So right now I'm going to clamp it. And as I clamp this going down, I make sure that I have overhang on the back end. I see a clear bead of adhesive. I see that I have adhesive here. I will not wipe the adhesive out in there. I'll let that dry. I simply wipe the top here because that's going to be the bottom side when we flip this top over, and I can see what that bond looks like. Now that we have our edge glued up, we have our sink glued up, what we'll do now is we'll let everything dry. Again, it will take probably about a half hour. Once that happens, then we'll start the cleanup process of getting rid of all the excess edges and routering everything down and sanding it.